إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الواحد الأحد الفرد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وحبيبه بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة فكشف الله به الغمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين فصلوات ربي وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين أجمعين. أما بعد، يقول المولى في كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, O you who believe, have taqwa, have consciousness, awareness and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a manner that He is most deserving of, subhanahu. And do not die, do not leave this life except in the state of Islam. My dear brothers and sisters, we often reflect on our life or feel in our life that things are difficult, that things are put in our ways. We're running and jumping through so many obstacles, and oftentimes we feel they're just unbearable. And sometimes we see this across humanity as a whole, and sometimes we reflect and we say, why is it that as believers we often find ourselves in a difficult situation? And we often find that we are, for example, a minority in this country, and people sometimes look at us in different ways, and we find it difficult to practice or to blend in, or however we look at it, one way or another we're finding some difficulty. If our sisters are wearing hijab in the street, sometimes people look at them differently. If we're praying in public, you might find someone staring at you differently. Or maybe you're having difficulty with your boss at work because it's time for prayer and they're giving you a hard time. Maybe we just find ourselves going through regular financial situations or issues, and all people will go through this. But sometimes we feel, as Muslims, maybe again we're looked down upon. We're going through an extra level of hardship. The first piece of news here is that everyone is going through this. And it's very difficult for us to compare our difficulties to one another. I might not know how you're feeling and your difficulty. You might be going through something that I can't see. You might have an illness that requires you to, that causes you so much pain or prevents you from doing something, but I don't see it here in the masjid when I see you. You might be going through an emotional challenge with your family, with one of your children, with your parents. You might be going through financial struggles. And it's impossible for us to look at each other and compare these. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is everyone is going through difficulty. And it's not fair for us to judge that our difficulty is harder than someone else's. But rather we should thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that we have and look at it from the bright side, the glass half full side. Because believe me, it's more than half full, but we just tend to look at it from look at the empty side and emphasize the empty portion, when in reality, inshallah, it's more than half full. The second is the Prophet ﷺ told us that as believers, our affairs are unique and are different. And the Prophet ﷺ described it as عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ, that it's so amazing, it's so unique, it's so incredible, the affair of, and the matter of the believer, that if we are faced with good, we are thankful and that is good for us. And if we are faced with harm or something that is difficult and we are patient, then it is also good for us. And on that, I wanted to reflect on a few ayat from the beginning of Surah Al-Ankabut. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim. Do people think, once they say we believe, that they will be left without being put to the test? We certainly tested those before them, and in this way Allah will clearly distinguish between those who are truthful and those who are liars. The reflection from these ayat is that as believers we must know and we must believe that our tests and our trials will be different. And just a few weeks ago, Shaykh Abdul Aziz was talking about these tests and these trials, and how even when we're put through smooth sailing, this is in itself a test and trial. And from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that when we are in asabatu sabah, that when we are in a good state, in ease, in blessings, we are thankful and that's good for us. That in itself is a trial. That in itself is a test. So whether we find ourselves in a good state, whether we find we have money, we have health, we have family, we have status, whatever we have and the blessings we see and the blessings that we have, they're a test, they're a trial, they're a fitna. It doesn't mean we can't enjoy it, it doesn't mean we can't use it, but we have to use it in what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the first, or one of the means of showing gratitude and thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and succeeding in that test. But then also, there's the difficulties and everything that I spoke about in the beginning of the khutbah when we're looking at the glass, the empty portion of the glass, and reflecting on all these difficulties and finding that we're going through this and astaghfirullah al-azim, we think, why Allah are you putting me through this difficulty? Why do I have to go through this challenge? Why do I have to struggle and feel pain and feel difficulty? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a very clear and concise message in this ayah to address that. أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Did we think, did people think that we could say we believe and that we would be left alone without trial? Iman is not just starting with the shahada. That's just the beginning. And it's important. It's a critical part to say the shahada. But as we say it with our tongues and hopefully start acting upon it, that's when we will truly feel it in our hearts. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't test us, and again, with the good and with the bad, if we're not put through these tests and trials and differences of life how is it fair that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then tell us you failed or you succeeded on the Day of Judgment? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, of course, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting us through this life as a living proof for ourselves on the Day of Judgment. If an exam is so easy to pass, what use is it if you have 100%? Think about it. If you're going into a test that is so easy to pass, and everyone goes in and leaves with 90, 100%, can you walk out and say, I did something good, I achieved something by passing in this test? Not really. You're just like, as they say, the average Joe. Everyone can do it. But really, the way we know, and the way that the true belief, or true anything of that matter, is shown, is by going through the difficulty, by going through the real exams of finding out whether it's true or not. And the classical example is, in process of extracting gold. How do you extract the gold from everything else? You apply heat, you apply pressure, and only the gold will survive that, and all the other impurities will not. And ultimately, you get the separation between them. If you don't put it through that, you have a piece of junk that you can do nothing with. That's of no value. Or if you look at what our generation runs on oil and petroleum, it's the same thing. They pull it out of the ground, it's this crude oil that is not worth much. You refine it, and then you go pay $1.40 at the pump to fill your gas. Which is, it's a small portion of what came out of that crude oil, but you're paying multiples for it, because that's the useful part that was extracted. And then the ayah after, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, this isn't something unique. This is not something new to our ummah, the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but rather this is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in life. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. This is the sunnah of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did this with everyone before us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested and tried every generation, every person, every ummah, so that we find, and they know, who is truthful, who is a true believer, who is steadfast on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who will get washed away with the simplest wave that comes and pulls it. And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described to us how to distinguish the true believer from not. So my dear brothers and sisters, when we find ourselves in a time of trial, or I should retract that statement and say, in every moment we should reflect on what trial we're being put through right now, whether it's a blessing or a calamity, and reflect on how our reaction to this calamity or blessing, is it bringing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or further away? Are we, the sand on the beach that the wave comes and goes and whatever was drawn in the sand is gone? Or are we the solid rock that won't move regardless of what waves come? We're steadfast and we're staying there. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. عباد الله، إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم وارض عن الخلفاء الراشدين والصحابة أجمعين والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا، اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا، اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا، اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم ثبتنا اللهم ثبتنا اللهم ثبتنا في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ثبتنا على الحق. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. Oh Allah, we ask you to keep us steadfast on your path. Oh Allah, we ask you to keep us steadfast through the trials and tribulations of life. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to assist us and help us through the trials that we go through in life. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you promised us not to give us more or burden us with more than we can handle. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to forgive us for our shortcomings. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to elevate our statuses in this life and in the hereafter. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to help and aid our brothers and sisters struggling around the world. We ask you, Allah, to bring peace and justice to humanity. We ask you, O Allah, to make us a reason and to make us a tool that in this life to bring about this justice. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to replace us, but rather to use us. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأقم الصلاة